you're gonna get free this time. Falling into a blue sky mind.
Hello and welcome back to You, Me, and the Elephant. This is Deb Air.
With crystal clear.
Oh, I love it. You know what we're headed for. We're headed for some crystal clear ahas today. We're so happy to have you back. We have been loving doing this, and we just want to thank you all that are listening and that are sharing this podcast. It really is our desire to have this be an incredible contagion. So today the question is, what are you sorry for? And as per usual, I was just talking to Crystal about this, that when we, first of all, just to let you know, two things. Number one, any of these elephants that we bring up on the podcast usually are very organic. It'll just sort of pop up in life. And as we're lifing, we're like, if we're lifing this, other people are lifing this. And I said lifing, by the way, not wifing, or you'd be like, what is she saying? I do make up words. you all probably.
We're going to add it to the Deb dictionary.
That's right. So, and the second part I wanted to say about that is, if you have your own elephants, to be like, hey, can you bat this around on one of your episodes? Please let us know. We're learning as we go. So what am I sorry for is something that it's incredible when you start to open up a simple phrase. And for me, I'm always using, obviously, my own life experiencing, but also experiencing working with different people and seeing, like I've mentioned before, these things that come up in our humanity that come up again and again and again. And so I'm sorry, the phrase I'm sorry may land different ways as you hear it. So I just even start by inviting you to close your eyes for a moment and take a breath in your nose and just let a sigh come out. And I want you to just listen to this phrase and just see where it lands for you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's words, and then there are the meanings, the energy within words. Everything is energy. What we begin to realize as we become more and more open, willing, and aware, we start to realize it's not so much the words as much as the energy that lives within them, in which we're responding to. So what we came up with to explore I'm sorry today, which I think is not only a really big elephant, but there's like elephants within the elephant. So we're going to just keep it simple in a way that I feel like Crystal and I at least found some usefulness and curiosities with. First of all, I'm sorry is a phrase of acknowledgement, right? It's a phrase that something went awry. We either feel regret and we want to acknowledge that piece in us, or acknowledge how we maybe made an impact on somebody else, whether we meant to do it or not do it. I think the point of that phrase is that we have some aspect of regret. And it's not about swimming in the regret. It's about, I'm sorry, is really about the acknowledgement as to move energy into a direction of more connection and more understanding between both parties. Does that make sense? Does that resonate? So that's I'm sorry. So we're going to just kind of, I'm sorry without any of the ways in which we have identified with I'm sorry. So we're going to put that phrase up on a shelf. It's sitting there. We're not closing it away, but we're just letting it sit there as we look at, okay, now that's what the phrase means in its generalist form. How is it that we live through this phrase, I'm sorry? And there happens to be a tendency, if we were to take little I'm sorry boats, we're going to hop on two I'm sorry boats. One is the over sorry boat. Where is it that we over sorry? And the other boat, you may guess, is the under sorry boat. Where is it that we resist saying I'm sorry? Or at least the energy, even if it weren't, it's not those words. We're really taking the spirit of what I'm sorry means, which again is that there's some aspect of acknowledgement that's wanting to happen to create deeper connection, either with self or between you and another, and you in a moment. So I'm going to hop on the over sorry boat. Is that okay?
Let's go.
Let's over sorry.
I'll row with you on this boat.
Okay, let's row on this. Hop on in. Anyone who's over sorry, to come on in. The other ones, just watch. Just
Oh,
watch.
the boat is a rockin'. I can feel it.
Yes, she said it. She said it. The boat.
A lot of people in this boat. I can feel it.
Yes, there are. I'll tell you, that brings me to one of the beautiful things that happen working with people in the embodiment work that we do, and that I do with network spinal and other modalities, but is that people wake up and start to feel things in their body and in their being that they hadn't prior. One of the beautiful things that happens often is someone will sit up and they might feel what they're feeling, and then all of a sudden they're feeling they're feeling more, meaning that the emotion, whatever emotion was attached to that posture, to that limiting belief, to that tension, all of a sudden starts to boil up, and now this person is emoting. They might be crying, they may be giggling. Usually it's when somebody cries, and it's often women, but it's not only women. I've had this happen with men, and I'm wondering if you can intuit what this person says when they're talking, and then all of a sudden this awkward little experience comes up that wasn't asked to be in the conversation, called an emotion, and there's tears, and all of a sudden somebody starts weeping and they go, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm doing this. I hear that too. I don't know why I'm doing this. In this example, I think that we don't even really understand why we're saying I'm sorry. What I often would say when people would cry and apologize for it, as I would say, don't say you're sorry. Because I was really rooting that person on, like, listen, there is nothing to apologize for you being you, for you having this emotion. Now, the trickery of this is that we are not a culture that values emotion as a strength. We are a culture that not too long ago, where if a woman who has greater access to emotion and their divinity during their moon cycle had, God forbid, some emotions, that they were called hysterical. And often what came with that is a hysterectomy. I mean, this is not that long ago. In order for a man to be strong, to be confident, don't cry. So if you are starting, and crying is just a gateway into your emotions and many different emotions. It's just, crying is just a vehicle of expression of your body that says, wow, I am feeling something novel and digesting some information that I wasn't able to before. All of a sudden, the file that you couldn't download just suddenly downloads. Like, hey, there's another story here. Your cry, whatever your cry is, your moment, is part of your expression, is part of you becoming more whole. It's part of who you are in your truth in this moment. But when you mix that with being indoctrinated not to cry, that you're weak, that you're hysterical, whatever it is, that in our bones, in the imprint, our cultural imprint for many years, long before we were born, does not value that. Especially in our culture. Some cultures, it is. Grief is valued, but in general, it's not. So if we have an experience that's not valued, and in our bones and in our neurology, it's like, wait a minute, does not compute, that's not valued, then it kind of is the same thing as saying that's a wrong response. That's a wrong response. It's not even happening in our head. It's not even going to our higher cortex. It's saying it's a wrong response. So what do I say? When I mess up, I say, I'm sorry. When I do something wrong, I say, I'm sorry. This is where we start to over sorry. We have an experience or we have an emotion and we go, I'm sorry. We apologize for feeling. This is so important to really consider and ask yourself, like, have you apologized? Have you said, I'm sorry, when really what you were doing was feeling? Really what you were doing is becoming more whole. Really what you were doing is letting the vulnerability hold you into your humanity. Unfortunately, the most acceptable thing to do is to say, I'm sorry, and to close that door. And what we do to ourselves is we close down our growth. We close down every time we say, I'm sorry, in a way that is not an acknowledgement. Let's go back to the definition of I'm sorry. Let's take it off the shelf again. It's an acknowledgement. There's a regret. Do we have a regret when we feel? Are we really sorry, or are we using this phrase to culturally condition ourselves to fit into culture and go, oh my gosh, we've been so conditioned to apologize for feeling, for experiencing life that is in an expression of tears that may be uncomfortable, that may make somebody else uncomfortable. How many times does someone say, hey, how you doing? Great. This is part of our status quo. I'm staying in a place where I don't really go too far one way or the other. But what happens when you start doing embodiment work and you start to bring more consciousness, your body is the site of liberation. So you start to liberate. And all of a sudden, the things that you couldn't download 20 years ago start downloading. You go, I don't know why I'm crying.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. Or guess what? Guess what else people have done? They uncontrollably start to joyfully laugh. Guess what they do? Guess what they say? I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm laughing so much. Literally, I've had people say, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm laughing. When you really start looking at this, it's like, wait a minute. Am I saying sorry to acknowledge, or am I regretting that I'm crying? Am I regretting that I'm laughing? No, it's I'm sorry to close it down, to put a period at the end and shut that down. So what's interesting is we over sorry often when we're trying to shut it down. It becomes the opposite of an acknowledgement.
And you brought up a good point, how it would feel when that sorry came so quickly and so in repetition, when there was a situation going down, maybe feelings coming up, and the shutdown was a quick I'm sorry to kind of get out of it, or to say, make this stop. This is too much, or whatever that message was. It was still that shut door, that not acknowledging what is the elephant in the room, not acknowledging it, and it was shutting down. And you feel that shut down. So as the person who's saying I'm sorry is shutting it down, and the person who has received the I'm sorry has been shut down.
Mic drop. We really want to invite you to consider, is this sorry a shutdown where I could be opening a door? And what I realized over time, and is that because I was receiving the empty, I'm sorry, basically a sorry to shut somebody down, to shut the moment down. It's empty, right? There's nothing behind it. There's no girth behind it. So nothing changes, basically. So if you can't have the feeling, if you can't be with the elephant and deal with that experience, there's no change. And so what happens? The sorry repeats. What happens? The sorry repeats, because nothing has changed in that dynamic. So whether it's the dishes in the sink Bailey is now 26, for those of you that don't know, I have a son. So I hope you are listening, because we beautifully have gone through so much discovery together. And he's such an incredible teacher for me. And I hope that I am for him, and that our willingness to learn from each other. And I'll give you an example of what you were just saying. He would say, I'm sorry, to just quiet me, because he couldn't handle, honestly, I didn't know this, but if I was upset because he didn't do the thing I asked when I asked 10 times, whatever that is, we all know that as parents. Like, I used to say something and I'd say it again, and then the 10th time I would raise my voice. And he's like, why are you yelling? I'm like, because it's the 10th time. And so he'd just be like, I'm sorry, with no action change. Because what he was unable to do in that moment is he could not handle upsetting his mother. That doesn't feel good, because he was not able to feel that regret, right? He wasn't able to do that. He just wanted it to stop because it was uncomfortable for him.
Mm.
We can use I'm sorry as a shutdown to ameliorate someone else, to try to make them comfortable or try to make us comfortable. But if the I'm sorry is coming with nothing behind it, or it's to shut down or avoid the feeling that you're having, then it's not really an I'm sorry, because it's not really an acknowledgement.
Yes.
When we over sorry, the question that I like to ask is, what am I really sorry for? If I'm sorry, what is that I'm actually directing the camera towards? And that's one of the things that I used to ask Bailey when he would just keep saying it, or he'd text me and he'd be like, I'm sorry. And it felt like nothing. And then what was amazing, years later, he was actually taking a men's program, and he was learning a lot of embodiment things and growing his brotherhood awareness and accountability. And we had one of these moments again where he would normally say, I'm sorry. And granted, this was a text, but what he said, instead of just I'm sorry, he said, I regret that I didn't tell you earlier. I'm sorry. Literally game changer. That was not an over sorry. That was not a shutdown sorry. That was an acknowledgement. And I felt it immediately in every cell of my body.
It's
I
totally
couldn't
different.
believe
Yeah.
one damn sentence difference. And it's not, again, about the words we're saying it. It's that I felt him mean it. And I felt the change in our dynamic after that.
Totally.
It's a way to consider becoming more mindful, bodyful, if you will, of what's coming out of our mouth. And how often are you maybe over sorrying? So we're going to slip off the over sorry boat. Is there anything you want to say about over sorry?
I feel like we address those things, those key things, for
Yeah,
sure.
and I think that we'd love to hear of what are the ways that maybe you, I'll say this, I'm going to say this about over sorry. We have been so acculturated to not feel that we don't feel worthy enough in a way when we're saying, oh my gosh, I'm sorry for feeling, I'm sorry for being, I'm sorry for existing. And so I think as we swim over to the under sorry boat, that part of what can happen in our development is that we all have, one of the core programmings that we can have as humans is that we feel not worthy in some way. We don't feel enough. Sometimes we feel like we're too much. But either way, there's a worthiness component to it. And I think that as we grow older, our teenagers within us are like, screw that. I'm so sick of being sorry, excuse me. And I think that that can sort of come into the boat of being under sorry, where we sometimes resist being sorry. And I definitely have found this in my relationships, even with my son, or in my intimate relationships and friendships. And it's a very interesting thing, because there's times where I've said to myself, like, I just say you're sorry, Deb, like, just say you're sorry. And one of the things that I can recognize is when I am really kind of projecting onto someone else and really doing a great job at analyzing all the things that they could maybe do better, or I wish that they could have done this that way, or if you just did this, then everything would be okay. That is a real great red flag of really asking myself, what is it? Is there a sorry in here that I'm like avoiding? I was having a conversation with someone not too long ago, and I was witnessing her do that, what I was just saying that I've done. Could you just say, I really hear you. I hear that this is hurtful for you, and I'm sorry. And I think the challenge comes, the resistance in saying I'm sorry when really a sorry could be used, is that we have apologized so much and given so much of our power away by saying I'm sorry when we don't mean it, when we over sorry, that it makes it more vulnerable for us to actually recognize enough of ourselves, enough love and compassion for ourselves to be like, hey, I can say sorry and not give away my power. I can say sorry because it acknowledges the humanity in that person. The trick is you need to check in with yourself and the humanity of yourself. And in this boat, we can tend to have resistance when we are having a hard time being vulnerable. I'm wondering, raise of hands, whoever has a hard time being vulnerable, that would be everybody, right? Vulnerability is just the gateway into the truth of who we are in a moment, is the gateway into love, is the gateway into connection. When we resist that, you can feel it in your body. For me, I didn't realize this. I would resist acknowledging, using I'm sorry as an acknowledgement, because I was protecting myself, because my teenage self ended up protecting my younger self that was so tired of saying sorry for just existing. And so I was protecting myself, because if I'm sorry means to me that I'm giving my power away to you, and that's all that happens, then that's not really an I'm sorry. That's another I'm sorry shut down. That's I'm gonna stop it by giving you my power and everything's right in the world. But really, sometimes when we're resisting that acknowledgement, we're resisting the vulnerability in ourselves to go, wow, you know what? I realize now that you're saying what you're saying that I probably came across kind of harsh. And I'm really sorry about that. I realize that I'm struggling with speaking my truth. And sometimes I rev up and I jump off with all my might, and it doesn't come across the way I mean it inside. I'm sorry. Now, that I'm sorry is a way to acknowledge somebody, but it's also acknowledging myself, right? I didn't give my power away. It's a way in. The acknowledgement is a way in to connection. The acknowledgement is in the way in to communication and coherence and love and deepening and intimacy. It's not the shut door. That's what I'm sorry is meant for. It's an open door in, not closing the door away.
That's a game changer awareness that you have there. I really am putting down and taking notes what you're saying on the other end of the screen. I can't help but I've got like 55 examples in my head right now. I mean, I know most of us listening to have been in an I'm sorry boat probably today, days in relationship, all the things. And I really appreciate acknowledging all the different pieces of the puzzle that are in each apology. To me, it's a game changer to even look at it from that side. I feel like I'm able to look at the other person in each one of those boats and have more threads in common with. And in order for that to even happen, I'm acknowledging that that means I can see and be with those threads within myself. So it's huge. And I'm really just taken back by it, all the different ways all the different threads that are underneath.
What you just hit for me is that that's the part where my humanity sees your humanity.
That's right.
And which really goes to that, to asking the question, number one, if we can say, wow, I'm going to start looking at I'm sorry and what needs to be acknowledged. Is there something that needs to be acknowledged within me? Is there something that needs to be acknowledged within this connection with this other person?
Mm-hmm.
Is part of me trigger happy with the I'm sorry? And if so, now that could be I'm sorry, I just don't have the time or energy. I'm just going to say I'm sorry. Now, if you say that, fine. But are you willing to go back to it? Is it that I'm sorry because you cried wrong? You laughed wrong? So you can ask yourself that question, what am I really sorry for? Am I sorry? And then in the other end of that, is there an acknowledgement when we're resisting, I'm sorry, is there an acknowledgement that needs to be had internally with myself? Is it something that's calling? Is there an acknowledgement that's wanting me, that's wanting my presence? And is there an acknowledgement that needs to be had or want to be had between me and this other person?
Mm.
I can feel it in my cells right now. The thing about embodiment is I'm realizing that, even I said this in the beginning of this episode, that it's sometimes less the words and more the energy that lives within the words. So when we're speaking here, I'm closing my eyes, I'm sometimes looking at crystal, I'm moving my body, I'm embodying the words. So we're really hoping that part of this podcast, all the virtual, that you can feel the vibration of the meaning, that you can walk away with a different experience in yourselves and a different curiosity or questioning that can help support you internally, your humanity, and potentially the humanity within your relationships.
Mm.
So there's an elephant. Thank you for taking our boat ride with I'm sorry. And as always, it is our honor and pleasure to dance with you and to dance with the elephants that we find along our path. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And now, Trevor Hall with Blue Sky Mind.
It's in and through the body, all along, in and through the body, all along. It's in and through the body, all along, in and through the body, all along. It's in and through the body.